I can't even understand any of you. I can't understand any of you. I get like beep, boop, bap, beep, bap, boop, bap. I was having a hard time with my earpiece on a show a few days ago, so that was what that was all about. It's not that I'm working with just robots. Though producer Tim, I know, Dan, and you would agree with this, producer Tim has always wished that we weren't humans, we were just robots who just listened to everything that he said. A Day and Dan at Home show brought to you by McDonald's. Yes, very exciting times, Dan, because the NBA is set to reopen practice facilities for many of their teams with lots of restrictions, of course. But that, of course, would lead us to ask, what about the Raptors?
Well, in Ontario, parts of Ontario have reopened this week. You've got garden centers, some outdoor projects. So things are slowly reopening. That might be good news for the Raptors, I think, if they're to return to practice. Let's hear from Toronto Mayor John Tory about that.
The proposal that was put forward to us, and in this case, local government meant the province as well, was for a very limited use by very limited numbers of staff people, essentially a couple of athletes at a time and a couple of trainers, quite literally. So you'd have a very, very small group of people in there. So that, I can just say to you, that proposal that we've worked on back and forth with the Raptors is under a very active consideration. I think the discussions have been going well because the Raptors have been very, very cooperative in understanding completely the challenges that we face in the public health side of this. And also from the standpoint of public perception in terms of, well, are they allowed to be open when everybody else isn't? And the circumstances in which they're being asking to be open are so limited that I think people will understand. And I think the fans will be very happy that our people can get back to doing a little bit of conditioning, which is really, I think, more than anything else what they're going to do because they've been off, like lots of other people, for quite some time.
More on this from our Raptors reporter, Josh Lewenberg. And with the NBA moving towards team practice facilities opening up across the league, Josh, some would interpret that as good news. But in the Raptors' case, this could be a little more complicated. Why?
Yeah, well, Ron, I think first it's important to note that this doesn't mean that we're anywhere closer to being able to watch live NBA games. The NBA wants to make sure that players have a controlled and safe environment to work out in, and that's what this is all about. Now, when the league does give teams the green light to open their practice facilities, and that could come as early as Friday, the Raptors would have to get approval from the government. Now, I know Masai Ujiri and the team, they're pushing hard for this to happen. They don't want the Raptors to be at a competitive disadvantage when other teams and other players are able to work out, but it's going to be done under the strict guidelines of the NBA. These aren't practices. These aren't scrimmages. These would be individual workouts with only a few players allowed in the facility at a time, no coaches, just trainers, and everybody would have to wear a mask when they're not working out.
Okay, so let's assume that the OVO Athletic Center, the Raptors practice facility, is deemed safe to open. How many players on the team would actually have immediate access to it?
Well, that's another obstacle is right now the Raptors have their players scattered across North America. You've got some guys here, Pascal Siakam, Serge Ibaka, and some others. And then half the team, they're in the U.S. Fred VanVleet is in Rockford. Norm Powell is in Vegas. That's not limited to the Raptors. Every team has their players all over the place right now. But the other 29 teams are all located in one country, whereas the Raptors are in another. So there is some question about whether or not those guys in the U.S. would be able to cross the border and come back into Canada. And if they are able to do that, they would have to be under quarantine for 14 days under the current restrictions before they're allowed in the facility. So there's a lot of moving pieces here, and that's just to get back into the gym for individual workouts. So that should speak to how far away we are from actually seeing basketball being played.
Well, you talked about it. There would still be a lot of restrictions on what they could do, how close they could be together. It is a step, albeit a small one, if the NBA has any hope at all of saving the season. Josh Lewenberg, thank you.
Lewenberg, big plant guy. I don't have any plants because they just die. I don't know what it is.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah. Hey, Jay, I think you would agree that Yeah, two people that pique our interest in Europe, Angela Merkel and Jurgen Klopp. And when one of those people say, hey, it's ready to play, time to play soccer, we listen. It wasn't Klopp.
No. In this case, it was Merkel, Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, who says, you can play soccer again in Germany. That will be as of the end of the month. Very exciting, Dan. The Bundesliga in Germany, set to become Europe's first major soccer league to return to action. Merkel has given the green light for the league to start as early as May the 15th. The Bundesliga has 9 match days remaining on its schedule and a commitment to finish the season by June the 30th. Now, of course, fans will not be allowed into stadiums, with a ban on mass gatherings in Germany until August the 31st. So there you go. We'll get to see Alphonso Davies in a Bayern Munich uniform, so that's very exciting. Dan, we move on to another edition of our All-Time 7 segment. And now we're on to the Ottawa Senators. And Dan, for all of these teams, we have a foundational player. I just want to submit my pick. I haven't seen this yet. I don't know who the foundational player is for the Senators, but my pick certainly would be TSN Ottawa Bureau Chief Brent Wallace.
Well, mine would be different. I went to a lot of Sens games with my cousin John, and the first one I ever went to, Peter Sidorkiewicz was in net. So if he's not on this team, someone's got to answer to that. Let's find out.
Joined by TSN Director of Scouting Craig Button and analyst Jamie McLennan. All right, gentlemen, time now to break down our 5th installment of TSN's All-Time 7 project. Today we're going to put the spotlight on the Ottawa Senators, including players from the original Senators who played in the NHL from 1917 to 34 and the current Sens. The #1 goalie, Hall of Famer Alec Connell, who compiled 43 shutouts over a 3-year period in the 1920s. Wade Redden and Hall of Fame-bound Erik Karlsson formed the first D pair. King Clancy, previously named to the Maple Leafs all-time team, is officially a 2-team all-timer. The Pizza Line, Heatley, Spezza, and Alfredsson back together again. Early NHL all-time goal leader Cy Denny and all-around all-star Marian Hossa are second-line wingers. Alexei Yashin is joined by Mark Stone, and Mike Fisher centers a checking line that includes all-time penalty minute leader Chris Neil. Gentlemen, the Senators were dominated by a pair of Swedes for more than 2 decades. Which of them deserves the title of the best modern-day Sen of them all, Daniel Alfredsson or Erik Karlsson? Craig?
Daniel Alfredsson, from the time of his arrival through his first season when he was named the NHL Rookie of the Year, it really signaled the beginning of the Senators building a team that was going to be a top-tier team, ultimately losing in the 2007 Stanley Cup Final. But Daniel Alfredsson was a brilliant Senator for a long period of time.
And I know he had a fantastic tenure, but let's take a look at Erik Karlsson's body of work. 2 Norris trophies and robbed of 2, so he should have 4. And in the 2017 playoffs against the Pittsburgh Penguins, he was arguably the 3rd best player on the planet behind Crosby and McDavid. His body of work speaks for itself in Ottawa.
Craig, how would you characterize the trade of Marian Hossa for Danny Heatley in 2005?
It was a great trade for the Senators. In the 4 seasons that Danny Heatley played for the Senators, only 2 players in the NHL scored more goals than Heatley. That was Ovechkin and Kovalchuk. We knew what Hossa went on to do, but it was a fantastic trade for the Senators.
And I take a look at giving some love to Mark Stone and Mike Fisher, 2 guys that were born and bred into this organization. Fisher, a 20-plus goal scorer, a pillar on and off the ice, a staple to that core group. And Mark Stone, one of the best 2-way players in the National Hockey League. I had the luxury of covering him for several years. He's as good as anybody in the National Hockey League for an all-around player.
So there you have it. You've heard from us. Now it's time for us to hear from you. What do you think of the roster our guys that selected as the all-time Sens team? Join the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag All-Time7.
So no Sidorkiewicz. We talk UFC 249 next. Or walking or leaning. I'll lean over and show you this because this is behind me every show. It's from a museum in Detroit. If you look closely, The neck has been glued back on because one day I picked it up. The head fell off. Sydney O'Toole had broken it and not told anyone. Thought she'd get away with it.
That's actually pretty crafty of her, literally. I mean, she used her craft skills to try to get away with breaking something in the house. Is that a small
I was very
replica
proud.
of
I was
Jeff
very proud.
Koons' puppy?
Yep, it is.
That's really cool. That's very cool, Toolsy. Hey, speaking of cool, UFC 249 is this weekend. I know you're excited, Toolsy. You're going to be ordering it, and you and Sydney and the whole family, they're going to be watching. And the fighters have begun to arrive, and this is something that's involved. I tried to drop it. It's a cotton swab. And, yeah, the main event is Tony Ferguson against Justin Gaethje. As part of the safety process, Ferguson required to take a nasal swab test, and he posted that to Instagram. So that's a lot of information. All UFC fighters, team members, staff, media members, they're all required to take an antibody test, which is like a finger prick and a nasal swab. So that sounds like a lot of fun. But yeah, you got to be safe ahead of UFC 249 this weekend. And a very exciting edition of the Jay and Dan podcast this week, because we had a chance to speak to proud Canadian and the top UFC insider out there right now, ESPN's Ariel Helwani. And I started with this very important question.
I just want to go back to the Ferguson Gaethje thing, because I feel like Gaethje comes in. He's the guy everyone wanted to come in. I didn't know much about him, to be honest, Ariel. I knew of him, but that Cowboy Cerrone fight was where I was really like, wow, this guy can really punch. Like, he can really hit people.
Oh, man. His nickname is The Highlight. I don't think it's a stretch to say he's one of the most exciting fighters in the UFC right now. I believe it's 6 fights that he has in the UFC and 8 fight night bonuses off the top of my head. I mean, the guy produces. I will say right here now, I want you guys to ban me from ever talking to you ever again if this fight is boring. There is no chance that this is a bad fight. There is no chance that Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje is a boring fight. Justin Gaethje has looked really good as of late. Now, the knock on him, like maybe 2-3 years ago, was he doesn't protect himself. He just throws caution to the wind. He doesn't fight smart. He takes 3 punches and then gives out 4 punches. He's not fighting like a guy who wants to have a long career. But
he's like Rock.
Fights, yes, but in his last few fights, he's changed his ways. He's gotten a lot more patient, a lot smarter, picks his shots, and has worked out really well for him. He's gone, what, I think off the top of my head, it's 3-4 straight finishes in a row. So it has really produced a guy that we all thought was going to turn into this sort of fighter, you know, a strong puncher, a heavy hitter, a fast puncher, but a guy who is avoiding taking damage. And, you know, he was in talks to fight Conor McGregor on July 11th. He was on that kind of trajectory. Of course, this happened, and it changed everything. But this is one of the best fighters in the UFC. And truly, you talk about Tony Ferguson, who's one of the more unique fighters, shall I say, in the UFC, and Justin Gaethje, who fights the way he fights. I really can't foresee, and no one's telling me to say this, I can't foresee any way this is a dud of a fight.
How great is this going to be? You got to listen to Ariel. He knows. He's been doing this for a long time. You can see the prelims for UFC 249 Saturday on TSN beginning at 8 Eastern and then at 10 Eastern. It is the main card on the pay-per-view. It's Tony Ferguson, Justin Gaethje, and don't forget about that Henry Cejudo, Dominic Cruz Bantamweight Championship fight. Dominic Cruz, what a story, returning from another injury. It is going to be an excellent card. Sports is back, and it all begins with the UFC.
I don't think I said anything during that interview. Chuba Hubbard's won the John Cornish Award as the most outstanding Canadian in NCAA football. The sophomore from Sherwood Park, Alberta, led college football in rushing with almost 2,100 yards and was tied for 3rd with 21 rushing touchdowns for Oklahoma State. Hubbard was the runner-up for the award in 2019. Rod, Dave Naylor have plenty more.
Let's bring back Dave Naylor to talk about this. Quite the year for Chuba Hubbard, Dave. Quite the accomplishment, rushing for over 2,000 yards, and now honored with the Cornish Award. And I want you to put all this in perspective. Not only what he did on the field last season for Oklahoma State, but the recognition he's received in this country.
Yeah, the Canadian cowboy, as they call him. I mean, this is a guy who a year ago had only started about half a season. He was known to people who were NCAA football enthusiasts, but you look at it right now, how his presence has grown across this country and across the United States as the guy who led the NCAA in rushing, led in virtually every meaningful statistical category for a running back. And despite the fact he was not a finalist for the Heisman Trophy and did not win the Doak Walker Award as the outstanding running back in college football, there was no taking away the John Cornish Trophy from him. He got all but one first-place vote. And you know, when you say that, that's no easy race this year. I mean, the field contained 2 players that were high NFL draft picks just recently, one player who was the defensive MVP on the Oklahoma State team that Chuba Hubbard plays on, and one guy who was a quarterback who led his team to a bowl win for the 3rd consecutive season. So I think right now we can say Chuba Hubbard is one of the 4 greatest running backs ever to play in NCAA football as a Canadian. Ruben Mays, Tim Biakabatuka, and of course John Cornish, for whom this award is named. Now, he does have 1 season left to go back at Oklahoma State. We obviously have a lot of uncertainty about whether or not they're going to play. He's still just 20 years old, doesn't turn 21 until June. I think he's looking to develop some physical maturity. The other thing that I think he probably wants to develop on his path to the National Football League is maybe a greater ability to catch the football. He had 328 carries last season and just 23 catches. And if you look at what running backs are asked to do in the NFL these days, there's almost as much of a premium on catching the ball as rushing it. But lots to prove for Chuba Hubbard in what he hopes will be his last season at Oklahoma State.
Yeah, I think he surprised a few not going in the NFL draft and going back to school. And as you say, he certainly left himself a tough act to follow. Our football insider, Dave Naylor.
Time now for Who Delivered, presented by McDelivery. On May 6, 1998, Kerry Wood pitched the 3rd 20-strikeout game in baseball history. He did it in just his 5th ever start, part of a complete game, not one hitter. That start remains the highest game score for any start in MLB history. So Kerry Wood delivered big time. This weekend, TSN revisits the 1987 Canada Cup. The final best-of-3 series of the tournament between Canada and the Soviet Union, beginning with Game 1, Friday night, 7:30 Eastern on TSN 4 and 5. Team Canada's roster featured 12 future Hockey Hall of Famers, including Gretzky and Lemieux. It's going to be great seeing that. Time for our You Blew It segment. We point out our errors. I should point out, since we are showing the 87 Canada Cup, that I was wearing a Russia shirt during the interview with Ariel, which I said nothing. I got that shirt in Russia while we were there for the Olympics. I was rooting for Team Canada.
Sure you were, Dan. And speaking of foreign languages and countries, I said Angela Merkel said ja to the Bundesliga returning. It's pronounced ja, not ja. So I can't speak Deutsch. As well, producer Tim messed up. I had a beautiful cotton swab drawing, and he blew it. Hey, Fish, can you have a broken glass sound?